Brad and Sheila Monroe didn't so much buy a house as they bought a kingdom. Deerfoot Island was a verdant, 6-acre heart of Maplewood Lake in upstate New York, accessible only by private bridge or boat. It came with a crumbling but charming Victorian lodge, a boathouse, and total, blissful seclusion. They'd spent 18 months and a fortune renovating, turning it into their personal sanctuary, far from the ceaseless churn of their former Wall Street lives. They'd only joined the Maplewood Shores Homeowners Association, HOA, because the fine print said any literal property owner had to. They paid the exorbitant annual dues and ignored the endless newsletters about approved paint colors and mailbox specifications. Their mailbox was on the mainland, after all. The trouble began with the eagles. A pair of bald eagles, descendants of a reintroduced population, had nested for decades in a massive white pine on the island's eastern shore. The Monroes loved them. To the HOA president, Clive Henderson, whose modernist glassbox had a pristine view of the island from the opposite shore, they were a nuisance. Unsanitary, he called them in the first letter. A potential hazard. The Monroes ignored it. Then came the complaints about the unsightly boathouse. They'd restored it to its original 1920s condition, the unauthorized flagpole, flying the stars and stripes, and the excessive ambient lighting. The solar-powered path lights were for safety. The final straw was the 4th of July. The Monroes hosted a small gathering for family. As dusk fell, they launched a modest, professional-grade fireworks display from their own dock, a breathtaking 20-minute celebration reflected in the lake. It was, by all accounts, beautiful. Clive Henderson saw it as an act of war. The noise disturbed his purebred Afghan hounds. He convened an emergency HOA board meeting. The Monroes were having coffee on their wraparound porch 2 weeks later when they heard the rumble. Not thunder. Diesel engines. They walked to the mainland end of their private bridge to see a surreal sight. For county sheriff's cruisers, an environmental conservation officer's truck, and a fire department SUV were parked haphazardly across the entrance to their bridge. Officers swarmed like ants. Sheriff Ed Larson, a serious man with a thick mustache, approached, holding a sheaf of papers. Bradford Monroe? Sheila Monroe? That's us, Brad said, crossing his arms. Having a convention? We have a judicial order, signed by Judge Hurley, authorizing a search and potential seizure of hazardous materials and unauthorized structures, Larson recited. We have multiple sworn complaints from the HOA and affidavits from Mr. Henderson alleging illegal explosive storage, violation of the Clean Water Act due to eagle fecal matter runoff, building code violations posing an imminent risk, and creating a public nuisance. Sheila burst out laughing. You're joking. Clive sent you for eagle poop? The order is legitimate, ma'am, Larson said, though his ears were red. We need to secure the island. You can accompany us voluntarily. Secure it from what? Brad asked, incredulous. My mother? She left yesterday. But the machinery was in motion. For 3 hours, police and officials tromped across Deerfoot Island. They inspected the boathouse, finding only life jackets and a vintage Chris-Craft. They took samples from the lake near the Eagle's tree. They measured the flagpole. They were thorough, professional, and deeply awkward. The Monroes followed, filming everything on their phones, offering bottled water and sarcastic commentary. The raid concluded with nothing seized and no citations issued. The environmental officer muttered something about the cleanest part of the damn lake. But as they left, Sheriff Larson served them with a civil summons. The HOA is seeking an injunction. Court date is in 2 weeks. They want you to dismantle the boathouse, remove the eagle's nest, which requires a federal permit you don't have, and cease all disruptive activities. Brad looked at the document, then at the retreating law enforcement convoy. Okay, Clive, he said softly. You want a war? You'll get a masterpiece. The county courthouse was packed. The HOA had mobilized its members, a sea of pastel polos and indignant whispers. Clive Henderson sat smugly beside his lawyer, a slick real estate litigator. The Monroes entered with their attorney, Eleanor Vance, a slight woman in her 60s with the calm demeanor of a predator. She was notoriously expensive and had never lost a property rights case. Judge Amanda Petroselli, known for her zero tolerance for nonsense, called the court to order. The HOA's lawyer, Mr. Braxton, launched into a dramatic recitation. The Monroes were rogue actors, their island a lawless fiefdom threatening property values and community harmony. He presented blurry photos of the fireworks, a decibel reading, taken from Henderson's porch, a half-mile away, and a veterinary bill for a stress-induced ailment of one of the Afghan hounds. We seek the court's intervention to compel compliance with the community's governing documents, Braxton concluded. Judge Petroselli turned to Eleanor Vance. "Counselor?" "Your Honor," Eleanor began, her voice like quiet thunder. "My clients have been subjected to harassment, a wasteful and frankly absurd deployment of public safety resources, and a grotesque invasion of their privacy. This isn't about bylaws. This is about a petty tyrant who can't stand that he doesn't own the view." She stood. First, the unauthorized structures. She entered into evidence the original 1891 land grant from the state of New York, the 1923 survey, and the Monroes deed. Deerfoot Island was deeded in perpetuity as a single, private parcel. It was never part of Maplewood Shores subdivision, platted in 1954. My client's mandatory membership is based on a literal rights clause that applies only to their mainland dock, a 10-foot square of water access. The HOA's authority ends at the water's edge. They have zero jurisdiction over the island itself, its structures, its flora, or its fauna. A murmur swept the room. Clive Henderson's smile vanished. Second, Eleanor continued, the bald eagle. A species protected under the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act and the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, both federal laws. She presented a certificate from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. My clients, anticipating this absurdity, applied for and received a formal disturbance permit for the nest 6 months ago, as responsible stewards. The HOA's demand to remove it is not only preposterous, it's a felony. Braxton was frantically flipping through his notes. Third, the fireworks, Eleanor said, pulling up a county map. Maplewood Shores HOA bylaws prohibit fireworks within the subdivision. The county ordinance permits them on private property with owner's consent. My client's dock is private property on an island outside the subdivision. They were legal. As for the nuisance, the sheriff's department report from that night, which we subpoenaed, shows they received one complaint. From Mr. Henderson. She saved the best for last. Finally, Your Honor, we come to the events of July 18, the siege of Deerfoot Island. At the behest of Mr. Henderson, who materially misled the court in his affidavit by claiming HOA jurisdiction over the island, county resources were squandered. We have the officer's own report stating no violations were found. She placed a final document on the bench. We are countersuing the Maplewood Shores HOA and Clive Henderson individually for malicious prosecution, abuse of process, trespass, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and for violating my client's constitutional rights under the Fourth Amendment. We are also filing a formal complaint with the State Bar regarding Mr. Braxton's failure to conduct basic due diligence on property jurisdiction. The courtroom was silent. Judge Petroselli removed her glasses, pinching the bridge of her nose. She looked at Clive Henderson, who had shrunk in his seat, then at the stoic Sheriff Larson in the back, who gave a slight, apologetic shrug. "Mr. Braxton," the judge said, her voice cold. "Is there a single, meritorious claim in this pile of pageantry?" "Your Honor, the governing documents are worth less than the paper they're printed on when applied to property they don't govern," she snapped. "This case is not only dismissed with prejudice, but I am sanctioning the HOA for bringing a frivolous action in bad faith. You will pay the defendant's legal fees. Furthermore, I am referring Mr. Henderson's affidavit to the county prosecutor for potential charges of filing a false report." She slammed her gavel. Court adjourned. The settlement was swift and substantial. The HOA's insurance company, furious, paid the Monroes legal fees and a significant, undisclosed sum for damages. Clive Henderson resigned and moved away shortly after, reportedly to a condo with a very strict HOA. The Monroes still live on Deerfoot Island. The Eagles raised 2 healthy chicks that summer. On the following 4th of July, Brad and Sheila hosted another party. As dusk fell, they didn't light a single firework. Instead, everyone gathered on the dock. At exactly 9 p.m., with a press of a button on a remote Brad held, a dozen powerful, silent spotlights mounted in the trees illuminated the great eagle's nest, now empty for the season, turning it into a breathtaking, golden monument against the night sky. It was visible for miles, a brilliant, silent, and perfectly legal beacon. And from the shore where Clive Henderson's house once stood, you could see it best of all.